Vic Ferrari, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Patrick, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Returning champion, Vic Ferrari. This is your second or maybe third time. And then we were on a podcast together with our buddy Cliff
That's
Yates
right.
for another podcast that was none of ours. All three of us had podcasts. So yeah, our paths do cross. There is no doubt about that. But I wanted to start out with a horse story from your NYPD laughing in the line of duty. Before I hit record, I was telling Vic that I was listening to it. Yeah, I was using the Alexa app or whatever it is on my phone. And I was in the car and I was literally laughing out loud. I stopped at a red light and they're like looking over me like, what's wrong with that guy? And I'm like, oh my God, I love horse stories like this. So why don't you help us out here, Vic? Tell us the horse story.
Sure. It's told to a friend of mine who's in the know, and it's in the 1970s. And back then, New York City was a rough place. Well, it's rough place now, but it was rough in the 70s. And you've got the Hell's Kitchen section of Manhattan, and it's a rough and tumble Irish neighborhood. And the NYPD's mounted unit began in 1858. It's been around forever. For the most part, they're ceremonial. The mounted cops stand in front of New York City landmarks in Manhattan and give directions to tourists, and people take photos with them. But I mean, they work too. I mean, during Times Square
Sure.
and New Year's Eve and protests and demonstrations, they're great for crowd control. And when you get unruly drunks and you got to move them and they're not moving, you
Oh,
got a
yeah.
2,000-pound horse. And when that thing goes sideways, people get thrown on their ass. I've seen it's like the Little Rascals, like people
Yep.
get launched when that horse's ass cracks them in the side. So in the 1970s, when they're not, well, let me take a step back. When they're not out there doing enforcement work, they're expected to ride around and give out parking tickets and things. They're not really doing much, but it's more ceremonial. So
Right.
there was this bar in Hell's Kitchen, and it was like an old man's dive bar. Could have done like a revival of the Iceman Cometh. And this mounted cop a few times a week would go up to the bar. It had double wide doors. He would lower his head. The horse would march through the bar, and out in the back there was a little beer garden. The cop would tie up his horse, and he would go and have a liquid lunch. Now, NYPD members then and now are strictly forbidden to consume alcohol on duty, but it was the 1970s. And because it was such a rough Irish neighborhood, you had this gang terrorizing the neighborhood called the Westies, led by Jimmy Coonan and Mickey Featherstone. And they were into drugs and they would shake down businesses for protection money. But since this cop and his horse was there so often, they basically left them alone because they didn't want any problems. So it was the best kept secret in Hell's Kitchen. And the local drunks would go in there and feed the horse carrots while the cop was having his cocktails. A couple of times the horse crapped on the floor of the bar, and the drunks thought that was good luck, and they'd run to the local OTB or off-track betting and place a bet because it's good luck. So one hot summer day while the cop is having his gin and tonic at a bar, the horse drops dead. And now the cop runs outside and he doesn't know what to do because he's not supposed to be back there in the first place. He can't get on the radio and call for the cavalry because the duty captain's going to show up. It's going to ask a lot of questions. You got alcohol in your breath and there's a dead horse back here. What the hell has been going on? The bartender had a brother who owned a towing company. So he calls his brother up and tells him to bring a tape measure. Brother shows up a couple of minutes later with a wrecker and a tape measure. And he's like, what am I doing here? And he goes, come out back. And he goes, holy shit. He goes, how did the horse die? And he goes, we didn't have time for an autopsy. We got to get him out of here. So what the tow truck driver did was he backed up the tow truck to the front of the bar, ran the cable through the bar, hooked it to the horse's bridle, and slowly but surely towed the horse through this bar. And the drunks are crying. The bartender's buying everybody around. Probably somebody was singing Danny Boy. Once that dead horse hit the sidewalk, the tow truck driver knew better to hang around. He was out of there. And that's when the mounted cop springs into action. He gets on the radio. He calls it 1013, which in NYPD jargon means officer needs assistance. Everybody's racing over there. The patrol supervisor shows up. The duty captain shows up. And the mounted cop gives this Academy Award-winning performance that he just stopped in front of the bar to use the bathroom, and the horse tied him to a parking meter, and the horse dropped dead outside. And of course, there was a couple of drunks inside that backed up his story, and cop got away with it. And the funny thing is, a couple of weeks later, the mounted cop returned with his new partner, a shiny colt named Mary Jane. But he never went back into the beer cart because he wasn't going to put himself through that again. So what
Sure.
he would do is there was a parking garage, a 24-hour indoor parking garage, either across the street or down the block, where he would park the horse,
Yeah.
and pay those guys a couple of bucks to look after them. And he would continue to go into the bar.
Oh my God. That I absolutely love that story. And it's amazing when you hear something like that, how it triggers memories. It's like I remember maybe about 6, 7 years ago, I'm day shift. It's my last year on the job. And my captain, where I worked before, I was like one of the slowest parts of the city. And I thought, hey, I'm just going to coast my way to retirement. Life is going to be great. Oh, no. I got about a year and a half to go, and they throw me back in the hood. And I'm like, really? Come on, guys. But, so be it. That's the way it is. And I'm in the office, and one of my cops calls me on the air and it's, hey, Sarge, can you give me can I call you? I'm like, yeah, sure. He knows my number. So he's like, Sarge, Ninth and Greenfield? And I'm like, yeah. There's an anti-prostitution sting and they're using horses. And I'm like, what? Well, they're dressing up horses as prostitutes, or the prostitutes can't. I mean, come on now. He's Sarge, I'm not pulling your leg. You got to come down here and see this. And I'm like, sure. So I go over there, sure as shit. There, there's fucking Secretariat in the gas station, like in an alley. She's in an alley between the gas station and like this huge fence. And the cop on top of the horse is calling out these hookers for undercovers to go in and swoop down on. And he's like a ninja. Nobody could, these hookers are completely oblivious to this guy on a horse in full uniform in the middle of like one of the worst neighborhoods in this city. And I'm like, oh my God. So I go up to him, I'm like, so you're the anti-prostitution horse detail today? And he said, Sarge, don't get me started. He said, you know what? Sometimes they don't think we're doing enough, so they throw something like
Right.
this at us. And I'm like, oh my God. So what was kind of cool about it though was there's some kids in the neighborhood that had never seen a horse before. Again, this is like one of the poorest parts of the city. So I'm like, hey, you guys want to come pet a horse? And they're like, we're not really sure what a horse is, and it's like, yeah, come on, come on, come on. Sure enough, so now the little crowd is gathering and we're forgetting about the prostitutes that, this is like 1 o'clock in the afternoon and they're all out there. And it turned into like a really cool thing where these kids actually had a chance to interact with a live horse. And the police weren't seen as these horrible people, blah, blah, blah. And it wound up being a PR moment and we didn't plan it, I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I took a selfie with the horse and I had the kids, taking pictures with the horse, and it turned out great. And then I drive away. 5 minutes later, I hear the call sign for the horse. I'm in I'm in pursuit, and I'm like, the horse is chasing somebody down the sidewalk. And
Like
I'm
an
like,
episode of McCloud.
yes. And I'm like, oh my God, this is way too funny. I'm like, oh my God. So that's my horse story. And one more thing about the guys that were on the horses, whenever they'd come in with an arrest or to do reports, you smelled them before you saw them.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
oh, that's pungent. That is wow.
Yes, it is.
Yikesers. But enough of the horsing around. Uh, tell us a little bit, if nobody's heard your stories, etc., about you. Tell us a little bit of how you got into law enforcement, and after that, a little bit how you started writing.
Yeah, I New York City kid, born and raised in the Bronx. As a child, I always wanted to become a police officer. There was a movie theater that my mom would take me to Saturday matinees, and around the corner was the police station. And I
Mhm.
was more fascinated with the police cars and the cops standing around out front, and every boy gravitates. They see that gun, and I knew what I wanted to do by like 5, 6 years old. I would look into the police cars and talk to the cops. And then when I was a teenager, I worked in a gas station, and they always would come in for flat tires or put chains on the tires for the snow chains. So I was always picking their brains. When I was 10, 11 years old, we would sneak into the local post office and steal FBI wanted posters off the wall and conduct manhunts. By 21, I took the test. I got hired by the New York City Police Department, had a wonderful 20-year career, worked in a ton of different units. My last 10, I was a detective in the auto crime division. And I retired and I was bored out of my mind. And, my friends and family said, you got all these really good stories. You should start writing them down. And I did. And I started writing one book after the next, and they started selling, and it's kind of turned into a little cottage industry for me.
How many books have you published so far?
7.
7. Okay. And how many years did that take you? About.
7. I
Okay.
average I average a book a year.
That's fabulous. The thing about it is you and I both know a ton of cops that it's like they retire and they got zero plan and they kind of wither away. It's
Yep.
really sad to watch. I just came from our union Christmas party and retirees are welcome. And every year it gets more and more depressing. I'm almost to the point where I don't even want to go anymore, except for the fact that I see some young cops that are now sergeants and lieutenants that were my cops way back in the day. So I love to see that. I like to interact with them and it's fun to tell old war stories and all that, but there's a, a bunch of guys that are like, I'm so depressed, Pat. I don't know what to do, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's horrible.
Yeah, well, cops, I think what happens is you're in that life, and it's not a job, it's a lifestyle.
It is.
It really is a lifestyle. And once you step off that merry-go-round, the merry-go-round's still going and you're on the outside, looking in. And I think guys lose their identity, they get depressed, and they don't know what to do with themselves. And some guys, they go the security route and that works for them. And then
Sure.
other guys, like you said, they're getting a pension, so they just kind of sit at home and wither away. And I said, no, that's not going to be me, because I worked in a unit that was really rich in heritage, and we used to have the same thing as what you just said, like an annual Christmas party. And I would see the old timers show up, and a lot of them really weren't happy. And I'm like, Jesus, what happens to guys when they retire? So I was hell bent on not letting that happen to me. And I mean, writing these books, it's a learning experience. I learned to self-publish. I learned to string stories together. Then I learned how to go and conduct interviews and be on podcasts, and then start my own podcast. And now I'm learning how to work. We were just talking off air before, how to use YouTube. So it's always evolving with the technology and making different connections with different people that can enable you to sell books and, be relevant.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of the phrase, dig the well before you're thirsty. So,
Yeah.
I saw my retirement looming on the horizon and I'm like, I don't want to be those guys, so same thing as you. And I'm like, I got into the self-publishing thing kind of by accident. And I did the podcasting and all that before I retired, actually. So when I retired, I hit the ground running. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm retired from one thing. Now I'm going to do something else, full time. And again, I'm at this union party and I see these guys and a lot of them have developed like really bad drinking habits.
Yeah.
Not that I'm not anti-drinking, but man, not as much. Holy shit.
Yeah, no, I know. It's a life. It's they start cocktailing 4 or 5 in the afternoon until they pass out.
Yeah. And their guts are getting huge. Yeah, it's no good. Their physical health is getting really bad. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to be you. I don't want to, fall into that trap. So this is one way of doing it. And it's fun, I think. So your NYPD series, that you're writing and you just released your last book, Laughing in the Line of Duty. You know, when you started writing this NYPD series, did you start out with the clear-cut idea of, yeah, this is going to be a series until I run out of stories? Or did you just write one book and it's like, man, I got a lot more stories in me here. Let's just keep this series going.
There really wasn't a plan at all. I put my first NYPD book together, and it started selling. And I said, okay, I might have something here. I
Yeah.
was making a little bit of money with it, and I've got tons of stories. And the funny thing is, like, I was so apprehensive of publishing that book because I'm not a sour grapes kind of guy. I don't name names. I change the names,
Right, right.
the dates, the precincts, the location. Some stories, it's a female doing something ridiculous. It was really a guy, or vice versa. I really don't want to put a spotlight on anybody. I don't want to get anybody divorced. I don't want to embarrass anybody.
Sure.
But at the same time, I got to tell the story. And I'm sitting there. I had spent a year of my life putting this book together. I spent money on the book cover, the editing, the whole 9 yards. And I'm standing there with my finger on the button, to upload it on the Amazon platform. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Should I really be doing this? And I'm like, screw it. I did it. And I was waiting because nowadays, with Facebook and all these social media platforms, you keep in touch with people. Whereas guys 20, 30 years ago, you retire, you might never see or hear from anybody again.
Right.
Now they can get in touch with you like that. And I'm like, there's going to be a lot of fallout from this book. I'm going to catch shit for this, but whatever. But I couldn't believe it. Like all of a sudden, everybody's reaching out to me. You should have wrote about this guy. And I know who you're talking about. You should have wrote about that guy. So then all of a sudden, guys are feeding me stories. So to date, after 5 NYPD books, I've written 7, but 5 are NYPD based. I've never gotten someone, trying to pissed off at me for writing a story that they think is too close to home.
Well, you hear so many times, and I've had cops come up to me at book signings that I don't even know. You know what it's like in a big department. You can go 25 years without knowing somebody, or a bunch of people have,
easily.
And it's like, hey, you know what? I'm thinking about doing the same thing as you are. How do I do it? I'm like, well, that's a big question. And a lot of it is trial and error. And that's the beauty of being self-published. You're learning as you go along. I mean, there are courses, there's all kinds of things you could do, to help out. I think Mark Dawson's self-publishing formula, his course is probably the best out there. If you really want to get in the nuts and bolts of self-publishing, I can't, all I know is everybody I've ever talked to that has gone through it is doing very well. And they said it was money well spent. But I did it the old fashioned way. I just kind of just did it.
Yeah, me too.
And, and that's the way it is, that's it. So
I think with self-publishing, the biggest mistake self-published authors, like guys like us that just kind of jump into it, they don't market their book. I've heard that for so many self-published authors in any genre. It's my book's not selling. It's like, listen, you could have the greatest thing in the world unless you put yourself out there and market it correctly. And I'm not talking about spending a lot of money on advertising. I'm just talking about getting it in front of people. And like you said, doing the grunt work. It's not going to sell.
Right. Well, first you have to start out with a good product. Back in the day, the path towards publishing was you had to get an agent. Then the agent would pitch your work. And then Amazon comes around and says, hey, you know what? You could put your book up here, and you don't need an agent. Well, okay. And Amazon was flooded with really shitty books that indie authors put out there with terrible covers. They weren't edited very well, and they kind of got a bad rap. But it's to the point now where people are seeing, especially traditional authors are even looking at it, and it's like, you know what? I'll make more money without going through a publishing house. Because unless you're Stephen King or James Patterson, somebody like that, you still have to do all the grunt work. You still have to put yourself out there. You have to be relevant. You have to, you can't just write a book, send it off to your editor, and then, the publisher publishes it, and you can go hide in a cave for, a year and expect everybody to buy your, those days are long, long gone. Now there's hybrid publishing where it's a combination. If somebody came to me with the right offer from a publishing house, I would do it, but it would have to be the right offer.
They'd have to write you in advance, and they'd have to promise
correct
you things.
Exactly. It would have to be the stars would have to align for me to do it. Never say never, that's for sure. But yeah, and it's tough, but the starting point is a good book. It has to be a good book. It can't be filled with a bunch of typos. Your first chapter has to grab those people. Your cover has to be spot on. Looking through Amazon, nobody should be able to tell a difference between an indie author and a traditional author looking at your cover. It has to be professional if you want to sell. I mean, if you don't want to sell a bunch of books, then don't worry about it. But it's everybody's got their own reasons for what they're doing. But I really love your covers. Who does those? Yeah, I was looking at those.
Yeah, so like the most research I did when I put my first book out was the book cover.
Yep.
And I liken for a self-published author, there's 2 things you got to get right to get an impulse buy, and it's got to be a catchy title
Yeah.
and a good looking book cover. And it's like going to the store and buying a bottle of wine. And you're going to a party, you're not a wine connoisseur, and you're going to buy a $10 to $15 bottle of wine, and you're in Publix and you're looking at and you're like, that's actually a catchy name and that's a nice label on there. You know what? That's going to work.
Yep.
Obviously, the product's got to be good or you're going to get dinged on the reviews. But I found a company in Canada. It's called ebooklaunch.com. And they're really good for self-published authors because they don't promise you the moon. They don't want money up front. It's an a la carte like company.
Yeah.
So for $500, I think it's about $500, they will design a book cover for you. And it's important to get the book cover right. And just if I can hold this up, NYPD laughing in the line of duty, you fill out a form, you give them the title of your book, you give them a little blurb of what it's about. So mine was law enforcement / comedy. I told them what I wanted as far as a patrol cop getting screamed at by a supervisor. I provided them with photos of
Yeah.
NYPD cops and what the uniform looks like, a supervised unit, what the barrier looked like. I said I wanted it to be along a Manhattan street. And another important thing about a book cover is the back. So the back has the blurb about what the book is about.
Yep.
It's got my photo, the author's photo, and then it's got a little blurb about the author. And there's two different types of book covers. One is for ebook, which ebook is just this. That'll be on Amazon. And then, sorry.
I got to take a quick time out. My dog has to go out and he ain't going to wait. So
okay,
just one sec. I'm sorry.
Okay. You can edit this, obviously.
I'm in, Kippy. I'll be a little bit late. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that.
No, I get it.
When he's got to go, he's got to go.
No, I know.
All right. You can just pick up from where you started. Stop.
Yeah. So what ebook launch they do is they can create for you a great paperback and ebook book cover. They also provide editing, copy edit, proofread, line editing. I think it's fairly reasonable, and they'll also do book formatting. So after your manuscript is fully edited, they'll do the margins and everything and the fonts, and it's probably about under $200 for a 60,000 word manuscript.
Okay. Yeah, that ain't bad. Just buyer beware. There's a lot of predatory companies out there for indie authors that, just beware. The ones that say, give me $5,000, we'll take care of everything. We're going to market your book. Yeah, it's disgusting how these companies take people's money. And another option is 99 Designs. That's how I got one of my first book covers. What that is, I think back when I did it, it was $400, and you submit your all the criteria for your cover design, and they have a cover design contest. You have all these artists or book cover designers that are going to compete for your business. So you have a bunch of book covers to choose from. And then what I did was the guy that I used, I really liked his work. Then I, then we just have a relationship going, and I use them for a lot of different stuff now. So that worked out great. But yeah, there's no one right way, but like you said, you got to have a good cover, a title that is that captures their attention. It and it has something to do with the book. A lot of people, it's like, Kippy's dream. Yeah, it's like, and it's, Vic's book about the NYPD, and it's like, okay, those two things have nothing to do with each other, but well, you should already know that because of X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, the reader doesn't know shit. It's, yeah, I'm totally on board with you on that. And then one more thing is the book description. There's a science to writing that. You could write a 60,000 word book, and it'll take a month for you to write, the 3 paragraph
Oh my
description of
God.
the
I
book.
spend that. It's so funny you should say that because that happens to me with every friggin' book. I've written 7 books. The manuscript is done. And now I've got to write a 300-word blurb, you know, to grab the reader's attention,
Yep.
why they should buy this book. And that's what I struggle with, that and the title of the book. That
Yeah.
that takes me a month and a half to
Yes.
either A, come up with a title for the book, and B, to write a book blurb about and about the author.
Right.
Anybody, I know myself better than anyone else, and I struggle with it.
Yep. My buddy Brian Cohen wrote a great book called How to Write a Sizzling Synopsis. And it's all about book blurbs. It's all about the book description. And he has it down to a science. And he also has a company. If you want to pay, he'll they'll write the book blurb for you. And it's Brian Cohen. Again, how to write a sizzling synopsis. And what I got out of it is, you got to have that hook, have that first sentence is, it's got to be gold. It's got to grab him by the lapel and drag him in. And it can't be a whole mini explanation of your book. One of the common pitfalls is, authors will try to write their entire book in this like book description. And it's like, no, it's more or less bullet points, reasons why they should why they should read this book. Is like, yeah, Vic Ferrari, laugh out loud, funny book about, NYPD, whatever. And in the very end, the last couple of sentences are huge. It's like, if it's a mystery, will, Vic find out the true identity of this kidnapper before air runs out in the coffin, or something like that. And the very end, you have to take people by the hand and tell them what to do. Go and hit the buy button. I know it sounds so stupid, it sounds so simple, but that's just human nature. People it's like, go buy this book, and some people are like, all right, I guess I'll buy this book. So that's that. But I wanted to ask you, how do you remember all the police stuff? From all these stories, do you have like old memo books that you go through or anything like that? Or how do you
No,
keep all
I
that straight?
I I had at one time a photographic memory. It's since I got to start deleting some things up there, but I can roll into a story if someone brings up a topic or something. I can roll into a story. I've always had a really good memory from when I was a child. It didn't get me anywhere in Catholic high school, but I remember all these. It's funny. I have a friend. My old partner says I'm his memory because, well, I'll call him up or we'll meet up, and I'll go, "Do you remember the time we locked this guy up?" And he's like, "What?" I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah. I haven't thought about it." He goes, How is that stuff like that fresh in your mind?" It just is. And again, I've got friends that feed me stories too. I've got
Okay.
one of my buddies is like my go-to guy. Whenever we're shooting this shit, he'll just start bringing something up, and I'm like, he goes, and I'm like, "Oh really?" He goes, "Oh, let me guess, that's gonna make it into your book." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You should start paying me for this." I said, "I'll pick up the check."
Well, I started writing for LMBPN and Michael Anderle, and that was the Brew City Blues series, set in Milwaukee, loosely based on my career, but it's fiction. I using a lot of artistic license there. But what happened to me was, first off, I just started going through my old memo books. I literally have a duffel bag of all my memo books from 25 years of being on the job. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that now. Oh shit, yeah, I remember that. Or you're talking to buddies, like you said, but I was having like really bad triggered PTSD at night. I was having nightmares like crazy. All of a sudden, it's like all these memories are coming back, and there's a lot of great ones, but there was some that weren't so great. Did anything like that happen to you?
No. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of things, but I sleep well at night. I'm not really haunted by anything. You know what I mean?
Right.
I guess something like that, half of 1%. The only dreams I have are I'm retiring soon. What am I going to do? How do I close out my cases? Or maybe I should be making more overtime, or what am I going to be doing when I retire? So it was definitely things that were on my mind 16 years ago. But no,
Okay.
I don't, I don't have any like, nightmares or anything like that.
Well, that's good. And I don't have them every night, but you know, when I first started writing that series, especially at first, I was just like, holy cow, I did not expect this. I didn't see it coming, and it lasted for a while. I mean, it wasn't debilitating where I couldn't like, go on with
No,
my
I get
normal
it.
day or anything like that. But my wife is like, what the hell has gotten into you? You're waking up in the middle of the night just screaming. The typical, you're shooting at somebody and there's no bullets in your gun, or you're missing every time and somebody's shooting at you, or, just crazy chases, whatever. But, some people it doesn't happen and some people it does. So I'm glad it isn't with you. So, excuse me. I love your intro to the latest NYPD laughing in the line of duty. You know, you were talking about the subculture that very few get a peek into. Can you kind of give us an example of that, or what you mean
Yeah,
by
like I
that?
said earlier, it's being a cop. It's a lifestyle. It's you tend most of your because most cops work more than 40 hours a week, and then after work you go out with these guys and girls, and most of your friends are guys and girls, and a department is large in New York City. Then you got cross-pollinating, guys marrying female cops, or this one's sister's a cop, or that one. So it just becomes a lifestyle, and people wouldn't just, I mean, that's what I said. You're about to see a subculture, and cops are very secretive. I
Yeah.
mean, I got my own podcast now, and it's like pulling teeth bringing guys on because, oh,
Yep.
can we change my name, or I don't want to do video, or they're very apprehensive creatures, cops. It's almost like when they retire from the job, it's like they really don't want to talk about it.
Well, that, and it's like I had a couple buddies that went up to the Rat Squad up to IAD, and my head was on the chopping block as well. And I mean, one of my old buddies that I was a squad partner with called me one day when I was a sergeant, and he was a sergeant up at IED, and he says, "Dude, you're on your way up here." And I'm like, "Whoa, what do you mean?" He says, "Your personnel file is in the captain's in basket, the one with the picture. That's like the official one." And he said, "That means you're coming up here." And I'm like, "Son of a biscuit." So I called the lieutenant, who was also uh, I wasn't a squad partner with her, but I worked a lot with her, just war horsing,
Right.
whatever. And I'm like, "Carrie Ann, you don't want me up there." And she said, "Well, this isn't official yet, but you'd love it up here." And I'm like, "No, I won't." I said, "You know what? I understand we need a good internal affairs department. Every department needs this. Nobody likes, a bad cop, and you have to have checks and balances. There's no way
Totally.
around it." But I said, that's not me. As a sergeant, yeah, I have to investigate my cops. I have to investigate, like citizen complaints. And that's the least favorite thing of that job. Do I want to do that 8 hours a day? Oh, hell no. That's, and I still love the street. I want to be on the street. I don't want to be up in an ivory tower somewhere, doing that job. But thank you, but no, thank you. So now I'm retired and I'm trying to get guys from IED that were my friends, and they're like, no, absolutely not. And I'm like,
Yeah, so you go through the same thing I do. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it is a subculture. And like you said before, that doesn't mean it's anything nefarious or evil or bad or corrupt. It's just we like to keep to ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and cops are only going to talk to other cops about
Yes.
certain things. They'll never, it's funny. After 9/11, they started bringing us down like maybe 6 months or a year afterwards. They started bringing us down in groups of like 10. Um, Through FEMA, they had psychologists
Okay.
and psychiatrists. I'm like, what the fuck? What is this? Like they're taking like my particular office had 20 guys in a substation office. So they took two groups of 10. And we're like, what is this? And we get there and they were very nice and they provided food. It was a very nice atmosphere. And then they broke us up into groups and like, you know, how are you feeling? Are you traumatized? And
Yeah.
we're just looking at each other and everybody's like, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. And to my knowledge, I mean, in my office, there were 20 guys. We all went down together down at Ground Zero. And I don't think anybody had nightmares I mean, to my knowledge, because I worked with these people for another 6 or 7 years and I didn't see any signs of mental illness, but it was like pulling teeth. It was almost like we were prisoners of war and it was name, rank, and serial number because nobody was going to, in the NYPD, that's another thing. If you're having any type of issues, the first thing they do is they put you on modified assignment. They take your guns away from you and then they transfer you somewhere. So they pull you out of your command, they change your hours and they put you somewhere and they err on the side of caution and you can waste away in the court system or out at the Whitestone Pound looking at abandoned cars and feral cats for years until they say, yeah, you know what? He's all right. Let's give him his guns back and we'll put him back on patrol or put him back with his squad so people are not going to talk to these people. I mean, you grow up in that culture and they're reaching out to you and everybody was like, thanks, but no thanks.
Sure. Yeah, that's very, very typical. We just got a police chaplain maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. We had an awful, awful run. First, there was a bunch of police suicides, and then a bunch of cops got killed in the line of duty. So we needed something. And this police chaplain was the perfect fit because he was a Milwaukee police officer for years. He was a vice detective. And he found God and he's not a holy roller that's forcing it down your throat. And nobody
Right.
wants that. And he's not forcing the chaplaincy thing down your throat. He's the guy that, hey, you know what? I was in a squad accident last night. I got nobody to take the kids to school in the morning. I'll take care of that for you. What does your wife need? He's just that guy. He's one of us. He's definitely he was a godsend. And now we have two shrinks. And one, her father was a Milwaukee police officer for 25 years. And the other one's married to a cop. So they know the culture. They know, and it's not the predatory. It's not the, hey, we're going to get you kind of thing. And it's like, hey, if you need help, we're here. That kind of deal. So that worked out really well for us. One more thing when I was looking at your intro is it's a young man's game. What do you mean by that?
Well, especially on patrol. It is a young man's game because a lot boils down to your tolerance. You're on patrol for 20 years. Yeah, you're still effective, but you get burnout. Your reflexes are slower. You're drinking 3-4 cups of coffee to keep up with everybody else. And I tell that, like, when I retired from the NYPD, I moved down to Florida and I got a job with a local police department. About a year and a half after I retire, they put me on midnights because I'm the new guy. That's fine. But again, I'm drinking 3-4 cups of coffee. I'm hearing domestic violence calls. I got to deal with drunks again. I mean, I went from being a detective and now I'm back on the road. It's a whole different game. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing this shit anymore. I'm done. It's time to do something else.
Yeah. I think that's a very common theme. One of my buddies is like, you know what? We're too old to be pushing around squad cars. That was the best part about being a sergeant. It's like, yeah, I was an active sergeant. I was on the street the entire time, but it's a different job. The cops, it's more physically and mentally tedious, answering calls for service all day long.
Well, cops are like dinosaurs too, right? It's like you just said, every police department, society evolves, the department evolves, and things you could do, you can't do anymore. They're changing procedures and you're set in your ways.
Yep.
And that's
Absolutely.
how a lot of guys get in trouble or start bumping heads because here you are, 40 something years old, you're on patrol or you're in a detective squad and you've got a 35 or a 30-year-old sergeant and he knows everything. And now you start getting into piston matches with guys that are younger than you. And then, you hope you got a rabbi to get you out of it, to go over his head. So there's a lot of pitfalls that people don't know about in law enforcement.
Right. Yeah,
And if you
that's
hang
for sure.
around too long, everybody outlives their usefulness, especially in law enforcement. And you could be the greatest detective or the greatest sergeant, and the game is changing right underneath your feet. And your contacts are retiring, and before you know it, you're a joke because you're around too long.
Right, exactly. And and the physicality too, it's like I'm just thinking about my last couple of foot chases on the job, and every time I got done with it, I'm like, I am way too old for this shit. The the second to the last one, there's a guy who's burglarizing garages in the middle of the day, and people are calling, and he's not even trying to hide it. And I find this dude, he's got a bottle of Mountain Dew in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and he's just crossing the street, and he just locks eyes with me, and he just has that oh shit moment, and he drops both and takes off like a jackrabbit, and I'm like, oh my god. So of course, yeah, I go after him, blah blah blah. Thank goodness there was some cops in the right place. I was the brush beagle. I was yeah, I drew him to the right place, and they got him. And my last one, my second, no, third last, whatever it was, I'm chasing this dude. He was a probation violator. There was a big foot chase, and he got away. I'm like, okay, well, all the cops left except for me. I just hung out in the weeds like a block away. Sure as shit, there's Cool Breeze just walking down the street, and I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
So I get on the air, and I'm like, all right, this guy is, I don't know, probably 21, 22 years old, probably weighs a buck 50, and he's wearing gym shorts and a t-shirt and tennis shoes. And I'm like, oh boy. And I'm like, okay. So he doesn't see me. I'm in a marked squad, and he doesn't see me. And I'm like, okay, this is great. So I get on the air because I want more troops, because I know I'm not going to outrun this guy. So sure enough, I get out of the car, I start walking, boom, he's gone like a jackrabbit. Now we're in 4 lanes of traffic in the middle of the day. It was a busy, busy street. And it's like something out of a Hollywood movie. I'm like putting my arm out, and I'm like bumping up against bumpers, blah, blah. And he winds up going in back of a convent. There's an actual convent. And, and finally he gets cornered in the back parking lot. And I ran like 3 or 4 city blocks. I'm ready for oxygen, man. I'm dying on the vine. And these nuns come running up to me. Like, are you okay, officer? Do you need water? I'm like, no, I need oxygen. This is killing me. Oh man. It's like, yeah. And then again, it's a young man's game, man. It's all day
Oh,
long.
it is.
Yep. And then you're complaining about sergeants when you're talking about the new bosses, the ones on the street, and the ones who hid as cops and then later on became bosses. And I can just close my eyes and see them. It's like, especially the ones that just they hid their entire careers. They're good at taking tests. And then boom, now they're your boss. I mean, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, it goes on all the time. So in the New York City Police Department, it's civil service exams to the rank of captain, then anything above captain and deputy inspector, inspector in chief, so on. That's the political. That's when the politicking begins. But the NYPD, it's just based on one civil service exam, really. And you get, like you said, you got these guys. It's a 40,000 person department, and there's so many inside positions in a precinct. I could name positions in a precinct. You got the auxiliary coordinator. He wrangles the auxiliary cops. He probably works about 15 minutes a week.
Right.
Community affairs, they do absolutely nothing. The highway safety officer is in charge of vehicle maintenance, and hiding equipment that you'll never get your hands on. There's 1,000,001 inside positions: roll call, assistant this, assistant that. And these people usually work Monday to Friday, weekends off. They're not working the holidays. They're not getting sent out to Coney Island or Times Square uneasy. We call them the house mouses or the palace guards. And they're never working overtime. They never have changed tour shifts, and it enables them to study. And in the NYPD police exam, the patrol guide, and I'm dating myself because I'm sure now everything's electronic, but the patrol guide was like double the size of the Manhattan Yellow Pages,
Oh
and
yeah.
everything's in there, from where they hide the toilet paper in the precinct to how to treat an injured horse. And if you study that, for a couple of years, you're going to do well on the sergeant's exam. And like I said, you get these men and women that never got their hands dirty, and they hit those tests right. And now all of a sudden the job's on the level. It was a big joke while they were hiding and doing this and doing that and disappearing for hours at a time, and nobody knew where they were. Now they're supervisors, and the job is on the level. And I sound so bitter, but they're the ones yelling and screaming at you. And like on my cover, that's from a story called Never Trust an Idiot with a Bullhorn, because inevitably, these are the guys they rise to the ranks of supervisor. They have some power and they don't know how to manage people.
Well, that's probably one of the reasons why I tested for sergeant, because I'm like, I could do a lot better job than you. You're a moron, and I had a copper that I came out of the academy with that was politically hooked up. She checked all the right boxes. Her dad was an alderman, blah blah blah. So, and his best friend was way up in the ranks of the department. And when you were new as a cop, you had to take your turn working in the front office. You had to take your turn being the booker. You had to take your turn doing all these jobs that nobody else wanted to do until you were done with probation. Then the new batch of rookies got to do it. And I'll never forget it because she was always inside. She always volunteered to be inside. And we're all like, cool. That means I don't have to be inside doing this stuff. And my lieutenant came out one night. It was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It was, midnight to 8. And she looked at this copper and she's like, Officer, Smith. She's like, how come I never see you on the street? What do you mean, boss? Blah, blah. She said, you're not going to learn this job in here. You're going to learn this job out there. And, she's pointing out the door. She said, do you want to be a fucking cop or don't you want to be a cop? Make up your mind. What do you want to do? So we're all like stunned because, it was super busy. I was like, wow, okay. And she's, oh, I want to be a cop, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, okay. A week later, she was transferred to the academy, doing some whatever community outreach, working a modified day shift assignment. And fast forward, she became a sergeant. Okay, her first fire, she's out there and she's like in complete panic mode. And we're all laughing at her. We're
Yeah.
like, this is one of the simplest things to do. Sparky comes, puts a swimming pool in somebody's basement and puts holes in the roof. And we just do crowd control, for the most part. These are easy unless there's a dead body or something crazy going on inside there. So what? Let the firefighters do their thing. And she's on the phone with one of her politically hooked up command staff. She says, I'm going to fire. What do I do? And we're all looking at each other. It's like, oh my God. And that's what happens when you hide for your entire career. You don't get the reps. And it was just, and I'm like, oh my God. And it's like, I just looked at her and I said, just get out of here, please. Just leave. I'll take care of it. Because I was a sergeant as well. And I'm like, you're not doing anybody any favors by being out here. Just go away. So of course, she wound up at internal affairs and she wrote out her career more or less being an inside cat, doing all that stuff.
Yeah, we had a lot of that too. Or if you work in a specialized unit, I mean, I broke my ass to get into the autocrine division, and we would get people, we used to call it parachuting in, because they didn't even, I mean, for someone without a hook, like it was very unusual for somebody like myself. My dad was a butcher. I wasn't affiliated with anybody politically.
Right.
Just the stars aligned. I was making a lot of stolen car arrests and I got in. But we would get people, you'd start recognizing the last names, because they're related to chiefs and politicians and stuff. And they were the worst. You would think that they would get into a unit like that. Like, all right, you got a leg up on everybody, 2 legs up on everybody. You might want to learn something. And they could be bothered. You know what I mean? And the supervisors were terrified of them because they knew if they started putting the heat to them, like, hey, you got to start doing the job, maybe they would get launched because these people, and you see that in a lot of the politically connected precincts, and I don't want to name them, but they're in Manhattan and the high profile things. And it's funny, there's a story in one of my books, and there was this jackass do-nothing cop that I knew early in my career, and somehow, some way, he became a lieutenant, and he wound up in this high-profile precinct. And my sergeant went there one day for something, and he's throwing his weight around and breaking my balls and everything. And my sergeant, when we were leaving, my sergeant goes, oh, I got to get his card. I go, he's not going to last a week. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, the detectives in this squad have more juice than he does. I says, he's going to step on his dick. They'll make one phone call and this guy will be out of here. And sure enough, I bet him lunch, and it was a month, and this guy got thrown out on his ass. So it's very political in the specialized units or the high profile precincts in
Sure.
Manhattan. And, again, you'll start recognizing the names of this one's chief so-and-so's kid, or this one's married to a chief or a deputy inspector. And, those people can impact your career with a phone call.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one more thing that I was laughing at, and we'll stop bagging on bosses, but having a court sergeant, I didn't realize there was one until, I was on the job for like a little bit, and it's like, hey, that Sergeant, Smith, he's kind of like the court Nazi, they called him. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I said, he's here to make sure that, we're not like screwing the system here, and making sure we're wearing our ties. If you're in long sleeves, you have to wear a
Yeah, yeah,
tie
yeah.
in court. And for a while we had to wear our hats inside the courtroom building. It was so dumb. It was so stupid. And we called him, the Sergeant Hat. It's like he was writing people up left and right. If you weren't wearing your hat, you weren't wearing your tie, if you didn't shave, and I was late shift. I was a vampire for freaking 14 years. And a couple of times he came up to me, he's like challenging me. He says, "Do you have a subpoena for this?" And I'm like, "Do you think I'm here on my free time? Do you think I want to be sitting in this courtroom after working midnight to 8? It's 11 o'clock, and they haven't even started pushing through the calendar yet." And I'm like, "No, I have zero. I don't want to be here, boss, but I have to be here." But he thought a couple of times he went in wearing a suit, thought he'd be like a ninja and like catch
Yeah.
people doing stuff. And he had a very distinctive face. The guy was like 6'4", and he had this big, bushy, like porn star mustache,
Yeah,
and a
he's not going to
huge
sneak up on anybody.
no, and a huge scar on his face. And it's like it's like out of a freaking movie. And it's like, no, you're he thought he's being all like cool and undercover, or like, no. No, you had something like that, right?
Yeah, well, our courts, each borough has a court system, and there's multiple supervisors in there. And in the NYPD, they're always changing procedures, and you're the last one to know it. And I had the stolen car arrest, and they wanted us to do video booking where you go to a precinct and they had like this antiquated television set, and you would talk to like Max Headroom, which would be a district attorney, or you do it over the phone. And a lot of times these cases would get bungled because of a jam fax machine or something. And I had this stolen car arrest, and my victim was moving out of the country the following week or within 2 weeks. So I wanted to make sure she filled out the proper paperwork and spoke to the district attorney face to face. I just didn't want the case getting shit canned down the road.
Yeah.
So I go down to the court section. I meet my victim. I'm not supposed to be down there. I'm supposed to be doing this from remote. And, it's later in the evening. It's about 8, 9 o'clock. The Manhattan court system, there's, only a handful of people down there. And I go up to a vending machine and I'm digging through my pockets to get a Snickers bar or whatever. And this guy comes walking up to me, and he's wearing a blue windbreaker zipped up with a white police shirt on and a tie. And I thought he was a court officer. And because he's wearing a white ceremonial shirt as opposed to a blue NYPD shirt. And
Yeah.
he goes, "What do you think you're doing?" I said, I'm getting dinner." And he starts breaking my balls. And I said, "Listen, Junior, I'm not taking orders from a court officer." I said, "If you want something, get it." And he unzips the windbreaker, and he's got an NYPD sergeant's shield. So I'm like, shit. And he goes, "Come with me." And he brings me into the back room. And, at the very least, I'm going to get what's called a command discipline, which I can lose up to 5 vacation days.
Ooh,
Or if he wants to hit me with charges and specifications, he can send me to the trial room where I'll take a heavier hit for being insubordinate. And he walks me in there, and he's getting my information. And who do I see but a kid I went to high school with who's a lieutenant? Guy I went to high school with. I dated his sister. We delivered pizza together in the same pizzeria. He's like, "Hey, Vic, how's it going?" I'm like, I run over. "How's it going?" We're shaking hands. And now this guy's just standing there. And then my buddy figures out what's going on. And he's asking him, "Well, what's wrong?" And he goes, "This detective was insubordinate." And he goes, "Vic, could you step out of the room for a second?" "Yeah, no problem." So then I came back in a couple of minutes later. He does the introduction, and he goes, "I want you two to play nice." And I said, "Listen, no harm, no foul. Sorry about it, boss." And this guy took it personally. He really did.
Okay.
And a couple of months later, or a year or two later, I forget, I've got this cop driving around with a stolen car. Internal Affairs gets involved, and this guy shows up. And now he's a lieutenant in Internal Affairs, and he wants me to investigate the case for him. And it goes into a whole thing because my union would never allow me to testify at hearings and things. So it's a whole thing about a case of mistaken identity, but this guy was one of those guys that was an inside guy his whole career.
Okay, gotcha. Now, let's talk about the press. It's a love-hate relationship. Most cops don't want to have anything to do with reporters or the press. You know, as a cop, we were just trained, don't say anything.
Right.
Let a supervisor take care of it or the PIO if they're there. You know, but there was always that one cop that started talking. It's like, what are you doing? Shut up. And I remember I was at a homicide at like, I don't know, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and this reporter for the news that I actually watched, he comes up and I like did a double take. I'm like, like you're a frightfully ugly man. Holy cow. I mean, there was like 10 pounds of makeup on this guy's face. I didn't realize until you're like standing up to him in real life. I'm like, holy shit, I think you might need, another couple of pounds of makeup. You're pretty ugly, dude. Yeah. What was some of your relationships with the press? How did that go?
We were told right out of the womb, if a reporter asks you a question, just politely refer to them to DCPI, Deputy Commissioner of Public Information. Don't say anything. No good of it can come. And in my book, there's a story about I was in a unit where you had a lot of old timers that were getting their balls broken. They were trying to force them off the job through retirement or transfer them. And the NYPD started bringing in young guys to take their jobs. And I got swept into that. And the old timers didn't like us, and we didn't like the old timers. So what the old timers did was they started a summons slowdown. And in the NYPD, there is a summons quota. They'll deny it, but there is. And if you don't write enough summonses, it can impact your career. They can, they can give you poor evaluations. You'll never go to a
those are tickets, right? We'd call them tickets.
Yeah, parking tickets, moving violations.
For sure.
And what they try to do is figure out who's leading the charge and make an example of them. So we had this summons slowdown in my precinct. It was a specialized unit at the time, and we had this old-time sergeant come down one day to address the troops at roll call. And he was a great guy, very respected. He actually had a combat cross, which means you were in a gun battle and the other party isn't around anymore. And when he was like E.F. Hutton, when he spoke, we listened. And he said, listen, he says, I'm not here to hurt anybody. I'm not here to threaten anybody. And he pointed upstairs, which was where the lieutenant's office is. He goes, this guy's looking to make an example of you guys. He goes, if you guys don't want to write summonses, don't write summonses. He goes, I'm just telling you. He goes, you made your point. He says, but this guy's going to hurt. He goes, there's a lot of other sergeants here that will hurt you. He says, I'm not going to be that guy. I'm just warning you that they're looking to strike back. So it was like, okay, point taken. Either write the tickets or deal with the consequences. And I was a rookie. And I was on probation. So we were kind of exempt from it. No one was going to break our balls.
Right.
And a couple of days later, a newspaper article appeared in one of the big papers. And someone in that room either was wearing a tape recorder or misquoted this guy. And basically the article was that it was this sergeant pushing this thing and retaliation and everything. And it really impacted the guy, because I was driving him a couple of days later and he was in a fog, and he's like, these guys, whoever did this ruined my career. He goes, I got young kids at school and the teachers are asking them, why is your father ordering cops to write summonses? And he was so bitter. He was a throwback. Like, he didn't even carry a nightstick. He used to carry an axe handle.
Oh,
he was involved in the Harlem riots in the late 60s, early 60s. He was a different kind of dude, man. And he would have stayed an extra couple of years, but he was just so pissed off at the whole thing. He retired. And I remember, like 6 months or a year later, the precinct club had a nice plaque with his name on it and his shield and the different units he worked in. And they called him like 3-4 times to pick up the plaque, and he never showed up.
Wow.
It was just like he was done with us. That was it. He wanted nothing to do with the NYPD after 25 years, and that was it. So, yeah, I saw early on that there was no upside to speaking to the press.
Yeah, it's funny because we had a new chief, and every new chief reinvents the wheel. They got to do things their way. And he says, you know what? You sergeants are now going to be talking to the press. And it's like, okay. So they actually brought in all the news stations in Milwaukee and a couple of other like indie ones with their cameras, the reporters, and they're doing like mock crime scenes and all this other stuff. So I'm looking at my buddy, we had to go to this. I said, how long do you think this is going to last? And he said, maybe a month. And I said, I think it'll happen. I think it's going to come crashing down in flames quicker than that. So sure as
Yeah.
shit, like a week later, somebody's at a homicide, and whoever the sergeant was said something incredibly stupid. It's on the air. The chief's head, explodes. He's like, the next day there's a memo. I don't want any sergeant talking to the press. And it's like, all right,
Yeah.
total turnaround. I'm like, good. I don't want to talk to him anyway. But it's funny because they would call our state, they would call the district, hey, anything going on, that kind of thing. And all of us that were acting lieutenants or lieutenants would be like, nope, nope, quiet as a church mouse. There's 3 homicides, a warehouse is on fire. Oh yeah, nothing's going on here. Everything's
They knew that because a lot of them carry police scanners. You
yeah.
know what I mean? They show up a lot of times rather quickly. I mean, especially, the big things, they're there.
We got lucky. We had analog, and that's, the scanners picked that up really. Then we went digital, and it took them a lot longer to show up to these scenes. They had to get new scanners, or I'm sure there's technology for it, but the old analogs, oh yeah, sometimes they beat us to the scene. And it's like, wow, okay, there's channel 12. But we had one lieutenant, and he was a decent enough guy, I guess. But there was a female reporter that would always call him, and he thought that she liked him. And we're all like, hey, boss, she doesn't like you. She just wants to get some information. It's
Yeah.
like, oh no, she really likes me. We're talking about going out on a date, blah, blah. I'm like, again,
Yeah,
she's a
she's
smoke
working you.
show and you're not. They used to call him Lieutenant Aquanoggin because his head was so gigantic. It was completely disproportionate for his body. When he was a cop and a sergeant, they used to hide his hat all the time because they had to have it specially made because his head was so big.
We had a couple of guys like that. We used to call Mardi Gras head.
Yeah, we call him Aquanoggin. So he finally retires and he's like, yeah, now's my chance. She's, whatever her name is, she's going to be at my retirement party and blah, blah, blah. I stop by and I'm like, hey, where's, like he's the longest face on his leg. Like, oh, she never showed up. I'm like, wow, no way. You mean she was using you, boss? Wow. That's so shocking that would happen. He just didn't get it. But oh my gosh, that was just, that was funny. So let's move on to your podcasts. You know, I know you have a podcast. How did you start yours? Where did that come from?
To promote my books, I started putting myself out there and doing 5 to 10 radio and podcast interviews a week. And then I said, you know what? Maybe I should start my own podcast to
Yep.
dovetail into my books. So what I did was I used the name from one of my books. I used the artwork. So it's called NYPD Through the Looking Glass Podcast. And what I do is I bring on retired people in law enforcement. I started originally with retired NYPD members, and then yourself was nice enough to come on, and Cliff Yates from the LA County Sheriff's Department. I've had a Secret Service agent on there. I've had a guy, he's not in law enforcement, but the guy goes around Florida and searches bodies of water
Yeah,
for
that's a good
missing
one.
persons.
I enjoyed that one. Yeah.
Yeah, he's doing it all out of his pocket. He just goes around. He investigates missing persons cases where, if someone's missing more than a year and their vehicle hasn't turned up, he basically figures out what their routine was from friends and family, and then he goes to small bodies of water in subdivisions, lakes, and canals. He goes out with a boat with sonar equipment.
Yep.
And then if he finds a vehicle, he calls the sheriff's department and they come and pull the boat out. And to date, he's solved 4 or 5 missing persons cases where he's recovered a car and a body. He recovered one. The guy was missing for 16 years.
Wow.
And he found the guy's car and body, well, skeletal remains, and he's
Right.
recovered well over 200 stolen vehicles.
Damn. That's amazing. It is fun. I really enjoy the podcasting thing because you meet people like that. And you're like, ordinarily you wouldn't have heard of it or you wouldn't be like connected to this person. All of a sudden, you got a front row seat. So it's pretty cool.
It is, and I saw him advertising or promoting his company on Facebook, and I reached out to him and I says, "Listen, I'm a retired NYPD detective. I think you're doing really great work. I had been following a couple of these missing person cases. That's actually how I figured out who he was. And I said, listen, I got this podcast. Would you like to come on and promote your business? Because he works strictly on donations.
Mm.
I think it's called Florida Sunshine State Recovery. If you just go on my podcast,
Yeah.
he's on one of those episodes, and he's got a GoFundMe page, and he does this. He travels the state of Florida with a bunch of his friends on his own dime, and they could use the donation.
Yeah. So when you're doing a podcast, do you find doing a solo show more enjoyable, or do you like the interviews? Do you like the interaction?
No, I like doing the interviews, especially, I mean, I do the research on the person. I try to figure out what questions to ask and what I'd like to know about it, what the audience would like to know.
Yeah. It's a different feeling though when you're doing a solo show. You feel like you're just talking into a void almost, right?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
if I can't get a guest, if I can't get a guest, what I do is I think of a story or a theme, and I'll just go into it. It's cool to have a good guest, but I mean, sometimes it's like, what? Scheduling, sometimes the person can't make it or something. And I like to put out an episode every Thursday. So I say, you know what? I got it. And it's happened. Things happen. If,
Yeah, sure do.
life gets in the way, it's the holidays. So, someone say, listen, Vic, I can't make today's show. Can we put it back a week? Yeah, absolutely. No problem. But I'm still going to put content out there. So
Yep.
I'll take one of my books. I'll start thumbing through it. And I'm like, you know what? I could string 2 or 3 quick stories together and tell that. And, maybe that'll promote book sales.
Yep, absolutely. Now, at the end of your book, you say we miss the fun and excitement, never worry about getting shot, even though we're like running towards gunfire. And we never worry about it, but we did worry about getting fired over some bullshit. Can you kind of expound on that a little?
Yeah, most cops aren't afraid of getting killed. You would have never taken the job if you thought you were going to get killed. We believe ourselves that nothing's going to happen to us, but the reality is most cops are more afraid of getting jammed up or fired or getting arrested than dying in the line of duty. I never gave it a second. I never thought nothing was going to happen to me. I'm not going to get killed, but did I worry about maybe getting jammed up with something? Yeah, or getting one too many civilian complaints that was going to impact my career?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like we're a very strange breed because, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, you hear a bunch of gunfire, and it's like, Mike, we'd get giddy. It's like, oh, cool, let's go.
Yeah, let's
It's
get
like,
over that.
yeah, let's get over there. It's like, while everybody's running the other direction, we're running at it. It's like, it's just the weirdest feeling. And I remember whenever it is like, hey, house fire, the dispatcher would come up or somebody come over there. Hey, there's a house on fire. I was like, days off, days off, days off. Because everybody knew if you ran into a house that was on fire,
Smoke inhalation.
what happened was you'd go in there and you'd save whoever, you get like a merit, you get an award. And that was
Oh,
like,
really? No, we
yeah,
didn't get that.
yeah, then you get like a day off or 2 days
No,
off,
no,
depending
no.
on what. If you did something like bravery, blah blah blah, you get a day off. And it was a day off that they couldn't deny. It didn't matter what the staffing was, it didn't matter any of that stuff. It was on the rare side, and I got to think 2 of them in my career, and I'm just like, that's right, Sarge or Lieutenant. It's like I can take off whatever I want with this. It was like the golden ticket. But yeah, again, this house is on fire and we're all like giddy little school kids. It's like, oh, cool, let's kick down some doors and go like save people. And it's just but you're getting marched up to IED for some bullshit, and you're like, oh God, you just have that sick feeling in your stomach of, man, yeah.
Yeah,
And
what do these
again,
guys want now? And they never tell
right.
you. Like with us, you would get a notification. So say for argument's sake, it was June, and you'd get this notification next week, June 15th, IB 0900 hours. Bring memo books, or if you were Detective Dars, daily activity reports from January to March. They
Oh,
would always ask for because they didn't want you to know what they were
okay.
looking at.
Yeah.
So, you fucking come in with all this shit, and then they would tell you, St. Patrick's Day, were you here? You know what I mean? So they it's funny. RIB evolved for the better. It used to be career house mouses that would go in there. They were weird. They were creepy. They didn't know what they were doing. And when Rudy Giuliani got in, and then William Bratton became the police commissioner and his team, what they quickly realized is no one was going to go to IB because they were incompetent. So what they did was they started drafting guys against their will, but it worked. So in the NYPD, say for argument's sake, I'm a detective in the auto crime division, and I get promoted to sergeant. I don't stay in auto crime. we call it back in the bag. You go back in uniform and you're going to go to a precinct for a couple of years. And then you can
Yeah,
apply to get back into organized crime or whatever specialized unit. You got to
sure.
do your patrol time unless you've got a heavy duty phone call. So so now I want to get back into organized crime. So now you have your OCCB interview, and at your interview, there would be auto crime, narcotics, vice, OCID, and now they would put IEB at the table. So it's kind of like the NFL combine before the draft,
Okay, yeah.
and you interview, and
Okay.
IEB has the first round pick. They have a couple of first round picks on that day. So, obviously I'm going to auto crime, but IEB turns around and goes, wait a minute. This guy knows everything about cars and insurance fraud. And, I'm sure a couple of cops a year burn their cars for the insurance money in a 40,000 person department. You know what? We want him. And you can't. And if you say, no, you know what? I'm not going to IEB. Well, guess what? You go back in the bag and you got to wait a year to go through the whole process. So what most guys and girls will do is they'll go, all right, I'll put in my year or two with IEB, and then I'll get my choice of assignment.
Yes. Yep.
But
Same
what
with
was
us.
good with that was, so now we're getting bosses that were drafted in. They weren't career guys that, cowards that wanted to hide away in there.
Right.
Now they're coming back and they're working in specialized units. Now we know how IEB thinks, because you got guys that are in there 2 years. Now we know how they think, right?
Right.
So you're not going to get grabbed for the picayune stuff. But on top of that, though, if something does happen, you can trust the people in there not to screw up a case.
Right.
You know what I mean? And unfortunately, when you work in organized crime, I always used to say this, whenever we would go up on a major case or you go up on a wiretap, inevitably some cop or cops wander onto the playing field, and then you've got to bring them in internal affairs.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Our internal affairs, it kind of morphed back and forth through my 25 years, but the general idea was you do your 2 or 3 years and then you get the pick of the litter. Where do you want to go?
Yeah.
That's kind of like the booby prize. But then towards the end, it's like, oh no, you're here until we tell you you're not going to be here. And it's like, what? Well, okay. Or, the rules change by who's in charge.
But if you're a cop or a detective and you just say, you know what, I'm going IEB, you're basically, in my world, you're persona non grata.
Okay.
That's it. You go, you're not hanging out in the cop bars anymore.
Oh, sure.
People are just looking at you, walking away from you.
Yeah.
It's like being shunned by the Amish, and I've seen it.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So what do you miss most about the job?
I miss the camaraderie. I do. I miss, the busting balls and kidding around. I miss the excitement. I miss the car chases. I miss figuring things out. I miss chasing the bad guys. I miss the excitement of getting a search warrant or a hit on a print. I don't miss working the St. Patrick's Day parade. I don't miss, the tour changes. I'm getting older now. There would be no way I could, work 12, 13 hours and then be expected to be back on a couple of hours sleep. It would, it would age me, I'd probably wind up having a heart attack. But I miss the camaraderie and the action.
I get it. A lot of people say that. I sent a couple of questions to you beforehand. I said, do you have a scary story about kind of getting your blood pressure up or near death, or a story that was heartwarming? Do you have anything like that?
Heartwarming was I'm a detective in the auto crime division. We're getting killed with Land Cruisers, and we know they're getting shipped out of the country. My partner and I drive around to Washington Heights. I find this Land Cruiser with out-of-state plates. In the back of the Land Cruiser is a hunting magazine and a dog crate. I dust the car for prints, send it off to the pound. I call the owner up. The owner says, "Did you find my dog?"
Oh, no.
I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I had a Chesapeake Bay Retriever. It's a hunting dog." I
Oh,
said,
wow.
"No,
Okay.
there was no dog. There was a crate." I says, "Well, tell me what happened." Him and his wife, he was an attorney, made good money. They had a house somewhere in upstate New York. On the way back from the weekend, he double parked his Land Cruiser, and him and his wife were taking stuff out of the car in front of their building. Some guy ran around, jumped into the front seat with a hoodie, and took off with the Land Cruiser. I said, "All right." I said, no dog." He goes, "Can you find my dog?" I says, "I doubt it." I says, "But I'll see what I can do." So our evidence collection team got a couple of prints. And as you know, dusting a car for prints, very difficult unless you fumigate it. The old days of the pixie dust.
Right.
Cars have plastic molded pour. It's almost next to impossible to get lifts inside a vehicle. It can happen, but it's difficult. So I got a couple of lifts. So by this time I had 10, 15 years on the job. I knew a lot of guys in a lot of units. One of my best friends was a sergeant in the fingerprint unit. So I reached out to him and I said, listen, I got these lifts off a stolen car case. And in the NYPD, like most police departments, it's called, I think, the safest system. The fingerprints are entered into this computer, supercomputer, based on level of importance. So homicides are going in first, rapes go in, burglaries, and then the auto stuff, right? Sure. And I says, listen, I got this guy that's missing a dog. And my friend's laughing. He goes, you're always a sucker for a dog. He goes, yeah, I'll move it up the pop. A couple of days later, he calls me back. He says, I got to hit on the print. He goes, it's like this street urchin. So I said, all right, send me his rap sheet and his photo and everything, right? So we got to hit on the print. And this guy is a career criminal, but he's like a bottom feeder. He's not a professional car thief. He's the guy, he's a road pirate. He breaks into your car for your CD and your change. Yeah. If you leave your door open, he's a burglar. He's a Renaissance bad guy, but he's a heroin addict dirtbag that he's got no residence, which I was like, he gets arrested in all 5 boroughs. Oh, so it's like, this guy's trying a ghost.
To find him. God.
Right. So in the NYPD, there was a thing called a wanted card. You would fill it out with his NYSID number, which is a New York State ID number that attaches to your fingerprint. That goes in the system. It's not a detainer, but if he gets arrested for something, nowadays it would be an email. Back then, it was a fax. So if he gets arrested anywhere in the 5 boroughs, you're going to get a fax from the court system saying, hey, this scumbag just got arrested in this borough. He's going to be in arraignment within 2 days. If you want to grab him, now would be the time. They're not going to hold him. It's not a warrant. So I'm going home one night. I see that he got picked up in Manhattan. My partner and I get up the first thing in the morning. We run down to court, and he got locked up on like a bullshit, I forget what it was, like maybe a bullshit drug case or something, but the judge dismissed it. So he's coming out of the courtroom with a shit-eating grin. We rearrest him. He's bent out of shape. We bring him down to the precinct. I've got photos of the Land Cruiser. I read him Miranda warnings, and I said, listen, were you ever in this Land Cruiser? No. Did you ever touch this Land Cruiser? No. Were you ever in this parking lot? No. I want to lock him in that he was never inside the Land Cruiser because his prints are in the Land Cruiser. Because if he said, yeah, I work in that parking garage, there could be an explanation, but no. I go, well, I got your prints in this car. And I says, I'm looking at your record. I says, you're going to do about 1.5 to 3 upstate. I said, or tell me where that fucking dog is and I'll work something out with the DA and maybe I can get you 90 days or a year on Rikers Island, which is closer to home. So he says, yeah. He goes, I stole it. He goes, I dropped the dog off. I sold the dog for like $20 in the Heights. I said, all right, show us where you sold the dog. Right. So driving around Washington Heights, he goes, that building, the woman came out of that building. I said, all right. So we're sitting there talking to him, and I'm asking about his rap sheet. And I go, you got a bank robbery in there. Like, you did federal time for a bank robbery. He goes, yeah, it was kind of a spur of the moment thing. He just got out of the bank and the dye pack blew up in his face. Like, the cops literally caught him like a block away. And I think he did it with a note. I don't think he had a gun. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, he's just a sad sack. Couple of minutes later, this woman, tight and bright spandex, comes walking the dog, and he goes, that's the dog. So my partner and I jump out. She's crying. I said, listen, he's handcuffed in the car. That's the guy that sold you the dog. She goes, yeah. So she didn't want to give the dog up, but she had to. Right. So the dog gets in the car in the back seat and is licking his face, and the dog cost like $5,000. So he goes, how much is that dog worth? I go, $5,000. He goes, are you fucking kidding me? Yeah. He goes, I would have never told you that. And it was like, because when he stole that Land Cruiser, he was a roach. He had no connections. Like, he was trying to sell that Land Cruiser and no one would buy it from him because they thought he was a cop or an informant. So long story short, the lawyer got his car back. He did 90 days or 6 months on Rikers Island and everybody was happy.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I absolutely love that. That's great. All right. A couple of Facebook questions from the Cops and Writers group. Christopher Kratchman asks, how does the NYPD determine which precinct an NYPD officer or detective is assigned to?
Well, out of the police academy, it depends on where you live. So if you live in the Bronx, chances are when you graduate the police academy, you're going to be working in Bronx or Manhattan. If you live in Long Island, chances are you're going to be working in Brooklyn or Queens. If you live in Brooklyn, chances are you're going to be working in Brooklyn or Staten Island. So they try to hook you up that you're not paying a toll. It doesn't always work out that way. When you're a detective, well, then that just depends on where you work, what you put in for.
Okay. And sometimes that's used as punishment. I know in our department it was.
Oh, highway therapy. Yeah. So if you work in the Bronx and you fuck up, they're going to send you to Staten Island or Brooklyn North. If you fuck up in Staten Island, they're going to send you to the Bronx. Yeah.
Yeah, because there was some miserable SOBs where, they did whatever. They rocked the boat somehow. They pissed off some kind of boss that had some actual juice. And they live on the far, far north side of Milwaukee. Before you know it, they're going to sign to the furthest district on the south side of Milwaukee. What was a 5 minute commute to work is now a 45 minute to an hour commute. Yeah. And like you said, highway therapy, that's for sure. Now, Miriam Hashem asks, how do detectives know if someone they arrested or investigated might be open to being an informant? How does an informant relationship get started?
You ask.
Yep.
It's there's different types of informants.
Yeah, there's
Some
different levels.
informants, they want
Yeah.
to cut their sentence, so they work for you in what's called court consideration. You got to bring in the district attorney, their defense attorney, you hammer out a deal. And usually, they've got to provide information over a period of time. It's got to be fruitful. They can't double deal you, which most informants always hold something back. They're like fat kids with a handful of candy bars. They're always holding one more trump card. They never want to give you the best things first. Every now and then you'll get an informant. It's rare. John Q. Citizen that sees something that's wrong and he's privy to and he wants to give it up, like a super of a building, and he knows this guy's dealing drugs in his apartment, or someone lives next door to a garage and he knows they're chopping cars, and they'll provide you with information. But most informants are guys or girls that get caught with their hands in the cookie jar. And we'd ask, if someone's involved in something really, interesting, we'll ask, listen, you want to go to jail for 5 years, or you want to work with us?
Right. And most of those are formal agreements. They have to get vetted. The DA has
Oh
to
yeah.
say the DA has to be on. It's not like what you see on TV where it's like a high level drug something and you have a detective or a cop like in the interrogation room. It's like, well, you'll be my bitch now for the next, 2 years, and you're gonna have to, blah blah blah. And they're promising the sun and the moon and the stars, and it's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
No.
I mean, the only way it works kind of like that is low level stuff. It's like I remember one time there was a housing project, and across from it there was a school, and I jacked up a kid that was like 16, 17 years old at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like in this parking lot of the school. I'm like, what are you doing here, dude? I could give you a ticket for curfew. I can give you a ticket for being on the school grounds, after hours, blah blah blah. And he says, "Well, do you want some information?" I'm like what kind of information? He says, "I know where everybody's dealing dope here." And I'm like, "Oh no, no kidding. Okay, let's work something out." And I could do something because it was low level stuff. And it's like, okay. And this kid, I call him Shaka Khan because he had a Walkman and all he listened to was Shaka Khan. And he was like freaked
Oh,
out
that's
because I
funny.
knew all the words and I'm like singing with him. We're all like, yeah. He's like, man, you're one of the coolest cops I've ever dealt with. And I'm like, because he thought I was just going to haul him in and, whatever. I'm like, no,
Now you saw the big picture.
yeah, we can be friends. We can be friends. He wasn't doing anything horrible or nefarious.
Right.
It's like, yeah, we could do that. All right. Where are we at here? We've been going at this for a while, so let's start wrapping this up. So what's next for you, Vic? Where are we going?
I'm going to run my podcast, see how many interesting guests I can get on, and I'm just going to keep riding this train, writing NYPD books until people stop buying them.
Outstanding. All right, everybody, go out and get NYPD Laughing in the Line of Duty. And I was laughing as I was reading this, so kudos to you, Vic. I really enjoyed reading that book. It was outstanding. Do you have anything else before we say goodbye?
No, just go to the Amazon books section, type in my name, Vic Ferrari, like the car. You can preview all my NYPD books for free. They're $10 paperback, $2.99 ebook download. You can get them before Christmas, and they make great stocking stuffers.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Vic.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I appreciate it.